All good? Everybody good? I'm Bill Shear, pastor of Guts Church in various places around northeast Oklahoma. And my wife Sandy's here. And her sidekick came with her. My daughter Kennedy's here. Let's see who else is here. Nobody really else is here of note. Oh, Chuck's here. Chuck. That's my grandbaby's name, too. It's a little awkward. At least I love one Chuck, you know what I mean? And last week I went to Cincinnati. Those kids can do it. They can flip it up and do it. I can't even drop it and do it. And spoke for Marcus Meekum. What was the name of that church, Rebecca? Seven Hills Church in Cincinnati. Great church, great guy. It was at his first Wednesday service. They just kicked it off, and it was great. But I'll tell you, at the end of it, the altar filled with people. It was like there probably was 65 or 70. It was over 50 people. Over 50 people that answered the altar call. And everybody was stunned. The pastor was stunned. He got up and said, "Man, I'm stunned." And, all I'm thinking is there had to be one more. And so I went back. He took the mic, and he got up and just talked about how stunned he was. And he said it's been 20 years since he's seen an altar call like that in church. And then he said something, I don't know, it didn't offer the mic back to me, but it was still stirring in me. There's got to be one more in here. And so I walked up, and he handed me the mic, and I just said, "Is there one more?" And this probably 70-year-old woman came up, hobbled up, 75 years old maybe. And the place just went crazy. And we'd already prayed for people. People were bawling, and it was amazing. And then Thursday morning, I went to Phoenix and to the Arizona State football preseason. And it was kind of, there wasn't really a plan. Of course, Coach Graham and Coach Patterson are still out there. They were here at Tulsa, and all the stuff that we did as a church with Tulsa over the years. So they kind of were just thinking I'd figure it out when I got there. But everything was real regimented, so it was, me figuring it out amongst their regiment that I'm not familiar with, was opened a little anxiety about it. But it started off, and it was kind of funny for me because I thought, okay, I didn't expect it, but they said, "Can you do a coaches meeting?" And I did a coaches meeting, and then I did another one, and then I did a volunteer player meeting that was like 60 players. And then I did another coaches meeting, and then I did a team meeting, and it was voluntary, but no one left. They had a meal, then they had a team meeting, and then they had a chapel. And it was up in the mountains in Arizona, so there's no cell coverage, spotty internet, beautiful scenery. There was one practice. I took some pictures, but I couldn't figure out if you could see it or not. It was the sun was shining on you to where it burned your skin, but it was torrentially raining at the same time. The skies were blue except for this one cloud kind of that was, you had to look for it to see it. And it was just it was pouring. I thought, so I tried to take a picture, but I don't know. I've got it, maybe it's on my phone. I might have deleted them, but maybe I'll send it to somebody that can make something out of it, because it was one of the most phenomenal things I've ever seen. And it's at, I don't know how many thousand of feet in that mountain. But just to tell you, these coaches, a lot of them are new there. A lot of turnover there over the last few years. And one coach, Phil Bennett, was the head coach at SMU. He's been in coaching. He's 62 or 3 or something, and he coached with Sherwood Taylor, Press's dad, at Kansas State back in like the early 80s, I think. But he was there. He's kind of a crusty old ball coach, you know. And they got this All-American defensive end that's just a stud. And I was watching him at practice, and he got in this kid's face like nose to nose, and he's just talking to him real stern. And he's kind of a John Wayne kind of type guy. And he's looking at him, and he said, you know, everything I've heard, he said, I'm new here. I don't know you. Everybody is so impressed with you. You're supposed to be so phenomenal. And he said, I'm not impressed because all I see is average. And he walked off, and that kid, I'm just watching that kid. I'm just thinking, that was one of the most awesome things I've ever seen in my life. But the kid stepped it up. But anyway, this guy had his wife 18 years ago got struck by lightning. And it's funny because when I first got familiar with Graham at Tulsa when he took over the head coaching job, I knew him when he was a defensive coordinator for Steve Cragthorpe a few years before that, but that's in the early 2000s. But then he said, if you can help him, and he pointed across the field at Herb Hand. He said, if you can help him, I'll give you the keys to the program. And it was at the end of practice, everybody's getting done. Herb kind of jogged over to me, big man, full, you know, real emotional, real vulgar, the whole thing, offensive line coach, stereotypical of offensive line coaches. Came over to me and said, hey, can I talk to you in my office after practice? And I said, well, sure. And so practice stopped, and I shook a few hands of people I knew, and I wasn't involved in the program at that time in Tulsa here, and went up to Hand's office, and I just sat in his office, and about 20 minutes later, he came in and closed the door and got on his knees in the middle of his office and was bawling and said, I need to get my life right with God. And I thought it was a setup, because Graham said, if you can win that guy, I'll give you the keys to the program. And then that guy comes in the office, and I haven't said a word, and he's on his knees repenting, and I led him to the Lord, and he goes, let's go tell Todd. And he came to Todd's office, he's bawling, tears, his face is soaking wet, and he's bawling, he's sobbing, and he's snot, and he's white, and he tells Graham, and Graham's just looking at me bewildered, like, what the heck did you do to this guy? And I didn't do a thing. So then that opened the door for us in Tulsa. Well, now that same door is open at Arizona State. And I'll just tell you the access we have, and I say we because there's some things we're going to do as a staff and as a church there. And this isn't on the internet or anything, is it? There's not a program that I know of in major college football or the pros where anybody has the kind of access that we have now to that program. Over 110 coaches and players answered the altar call Friday night. Kids are bawling. There was one kid that stood up. He was on the front row. He's an All-American wide receiver. I think his name's Henry. He was a freshman All-American last year, and I mean he's all everything now projected. But I didn't know who he was, but he was on the front row, and I used him as an example. I had him stand up, and then I laid hands on him, and I prayed for him, and I was just talking about the power of God and how our contact with people presents that power in their lives. And I took my hand off him, and I kept preaching. I turned and looked, and I said, man, you can sit down. And he just kind of stood there. And I walked over. I said, do you want to stand? He said, I'd appreciate it if I could. And he stood the whole time. The whole time. I spoke another probably 30 minutes, and he stood the whole time. And then kids came up, and every one of those boys, coaches stood up and answered the altar call. They didn't just shake my hand, they hugged me. Like I hugged 100 players. It's like, you know, and I mean, huge men, and was just amazing. But this coach, Phil Bennett, who's a defensive coordinator there, his wife got struck by lightning 18 years ago, that there was a little storm that came up a few miles from where they were in Kansas. Lightning struck. It went to 11,000 feet, and then it turned and went parallel with the earth for 22 miles. And it got to their community, and it turned again and dropped on his wife and hit his wife and knocked her 10 feet up in the air and 20 feet across the street. And the neighbors are all outside. They watched it. And he's just sitting there, and this was Friday night after the chapel, and he told all those coaches, he said, I know that Todd, Coach Graham's friend's coming in, who's a pastor, but I'm a skeptic. He just said, I'm not buying it. Well, he and I there was almost an immediate connection. And R.C. Slocum's son is on that staff, same way. Both are very kind of rough men. But we were sitting outside. It was pouring out rain, and there was lightning, so they wouldn't let anybody leave that Friday night after the chapel. Everybody kind of hung out. Guys are playing dominoes, and people are talking, and they're listening to music. And I was on the porch with Phil, and he said, I'll tell you, I'm just struggling with all this because he said, I really think you're right. He said, but, my wife, and he reiterated the story that I'd heard 2 or 3 times the last couple of days about his wife getting hit by lightning. And I've told that story now 10 times. It's that compelling a story. And he said, I know it was God. I know it was God's plan. I just have such a hard time with it. And I'm just looking at him, and his eyes are all welled up, and once in a while a tear drop. And this is a rough old man, a ball coach. And he said, I said, Coach, could I correct you? He said, yeah. I said, that lightning striking your wife was not God. Was not God's plan. I said, was your wife a Christian? He said, yeah, strong Christian, loved Jesus, talked about Jesus. I said, okay, she's in heaven. He goes, man, I hope so. And I said, no, she's in heaven. And I said, and that lightning strike wasn't God. I said, thousands of years ago, Adam and Eve leased the power of the earth to Lucifer. And now Lucifer can wreak havoc in what we refer to as natural senses, in storms and other things. But that wasn't God. That was not God's plan. I'm just telling you. And he said, well, how do we know God's plan? I said, well, God's plan is for me to be on this porch talking to you right now. And I said, it's interesting because this is and lightning was striking every 10 seconds in the mountain, lightning striking everywhere. And I mean, it was booming. This is a place where you go at night, you can look up and you can see satellites orbiting the earth. That's how clear the sky is. It's just an amazing place. But here's the storm. I said, so your wife died in a storm, and now we're sitting in a storm, and this is God's plan. God's plan is what he did is he used that storm. He didn't form that storm, but he's using that storm for me to be able to communicate to you that matter-of-factly that was not God, and it's God's will for you to understand that his plan for you is good and not evil, to give you a future and a hope. And a couple minutes later, he's like, man, can you talk to my kids, the grown kids, and about it? But the point I want to tell you guys is that everywhere I go, the impression of this church is over the top. It's phenomenal. Everywhere I go. And it's not just out of town, it's in town. There's almost, in meeting with pastors in town over racial issues, there is such a distinct appreciation, but also it almost becomes like an intimidation to some churches and some ministry people around and out of town, just because evidently the reports of and the culture of this church it's mind-blowing to people. And their expectation is beyond what anybody would consider reasonable. Because when I look at it, I look around, it's pretty ordinary, pretty just like that All-American defensive end. It's pretty average. But I'll tell you, there's nothing average about who you are and nothing average about what you do. I can't impress upon you enough how impressive you are. And I want to highlight 3 words for you today, and I want you to write them down. The first word is imagine. And coming off this last week, and honestly, everything we do, the second word's proud. And the third word is yet. And I want to bring some life to those 3 words. The first word, I'll just tell you, I can imagine, because the expression is you can't imagine. But I'm telling you, I can't imagine the difference you're about to make in the lives of other people. I believe everything we do builds us. Everything that happens in our life builds us. I think, it's interesting because lately I've been talking about people that build something and build something greater, the people I really appreciate. And I think, that's what God's doing in us. He's building in us. He's building us to be who He's called us to be. Can't you just imagine the life you're about to build for you and your family? I mean, see, that's what you're doing. See, what you do makes a difference in people's lives, and we can imagine that. But just imagine the life that you're creating and you're building for you and your family. And I look back on my life with Sandy, and I wish that I would have had somebody sitting in front of me when I was 28 years old and newlywed married and said, "Man, you're going to build something incredible for you, with your wife and for your family." And because I think it's happened, but it's only happened because it's just the grace of God for me, because it wasn't that intentional. I haven't lived a life like trying to acquire stuff. I love stuff, but I haven't lived a life trying to acquire stuff. But you're creating something for you, for your family, that listen, is going to carry over and seep into other people's lives. I want you to know in advance how proud of you that I am. And I even think about, I'll ask the interns. I've yet to have an intern. I've yet to have an intern that I've asked, "How's your internship?" that has said it's hard. And I don't know how many years it's been since somebody's said, "Oh, it's hard." Every time I ask somebody how their internship is, they say it's amazing. Or they say it's, "Oh my gosh, it's incredible." And I know who they're answering. I get the layers of, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to face the repercussions of a wrong answer with this guy." But even you rookie interns in here, I'm proud of you. What you're going to accomplish this week, I mean, the excitement. Sandy came home last night after the work night last night, it's worth the price of admission. The ministry yesterday. But I've got to remind you that we have got to, we have to, it's about God's purpose. It's about God using people to fulfill His purpose. And I know all the toil and all the work and all the tasks have to do with the property and the programs. And let me tell you, that's 3 and 4 on our list here. The top 2 are God's purpose and God's people. And we have to connect with the core, committed, and congregational people in our church. We love the guests. We love the visitors. Everything we do points to them. Everything we do tries to roll out the red carpet for them. But I'm telling you, we have to connect. We have to make contact and connect. The only way you can connect with these people is to make contact with them. And it has to be intentional. Because otherwise, their lives are busy. And we're not going to be able to squeeze ourselves into their lives if we don't take initiative and make contact. You have to make contact to have connection. But I want you to know how proud I am of you. And finally, and as good as it gets here, remember that the best, our very best, is yet to come. And you know, as many transitions as we go through, I'm just telling you, our best is yet to come. So imagine proud and yet. We're not finished. We are going to do something and continue to do things that are spectacular for God. And yeah, you know what? That spectacular event adds up to 1,000 little microscopic things. And you do not work for a man who doesn't sweat the small stuff. I do. Because it's all small stuff. And yeah, I've got to have a big picture and a macro look at everything. But I'll tell you, regarding your area, regarding your assignment, regarding your task, micromanaging is not a negative. Because that's where people's hurts are. That's where people's pains are. That's where people's needs are. That's where people's expectations are. They're all in that micro part of our ministry. The macro ministry, yeah, I think we've got to keep our eye on the prize. And not just me and not just Sandy and not just, but everybody has to, we have to keep our eye on the prize. And it's always going to be, as long as I live, it's going to be, we have to fill this room. Okay, but why are we filling the room? We're filling the room to get them to come back. So how do we get them to come back? We have to make contact with them. We have to initiate it. We have to tend to the knit and tend to the little things. But I can imagine. I mean, I have a strong image in my heart of where we're going. And I want to make sure you do as well. Because I'm proud of you, and the best is yet to come. God, we love you and we praise you. We thank you for this week. God, we thank you for Super Bowl week in our church for the brunch. God, that everything we do is for those women who come to this brunch to be introduced to you, to have an urgency in their hearts to follow you, and to plug into a life-giving church. God, I thank you for salvations. God, I thank you for healings. God, I thank you for miracles. God, I thank you for the leadership, God, that's required to bring people to redemption and to deliver people from all kinds of evil. God, we love you and we praise you. And we thank you for this preparation time, this preparation week. God, that we see the little things, that we can tend to the little things, that nothing slips by because we have this many sets of eyes on things. And God, help us to contact and connect with our core, committed, and congregational people. In Jesus' name, amen.